can get going. So we've been talking the last couple of weeks, Olowokimi, Elena, we've been talking about leading up to the Civil War, right? And how it really was a long time coming. Like the Civil War happens in 1861,
Uh-huh.
um, but it takes decades of conflict um, to get to that point, to get to the point where it explodes, where the only thing left to do is fight a war, right? They tried all kinds of different things to figure out how can these two parts of the country, the North and the South that really values its slavery, the North in the early colonial times, pre-American Revolution, there was slavery, but then over the years, the North kind of got rid of the slavery state by state. They outlawed it, or it just wasn't a big part of their economy, and they just got rid of it. So by early 1800s, you have a clear separation between the North and the South. You have the
Mm-hmm.
oh, Ruby and Monique, thank you for logging in. I see you there.
Uh-huh. How are you?
Good, good. Good morning.
Morning.
Um, so yeah, we're getting started here. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a long time coming. They try to solve that problem. How can this large and growing nation live together, right? These two halves that want slavery, don't want slavery, or don't care about slavery as
Mm-hmm.
much. And so they tried to, and the concern was new states, especially, right? As they expanded west, they picked up all that, because we start with the 13 colonies on the East Coast or 13 states,
Mm-hmm.
and then they grow one by one and it expands westward. Are those new states going to have slavery or are they not going to have slavery? And they tried to answer that question a bunch of different ways. Congress tried to pass laws to make plans, right? We talked about the Missouri Compromise, the Kansas Nebraska Act, right?
Mm-hmm.
But by 1861, by 1860, Lincoln wins the election, and that's what we talked about last week. And it became, well, I don't know if it became clear, but it was decided that the only thing left to do, the only way to solve this problem was through a war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, well, no, that's not true. I can't say that. Was through uh, the South didn't declare war, right? What did we talk about last week? What move did the South make? What did they do? They didn't declare war. What did they try to do?
They try to free the slave.
Well, no, freeing the slaves
Oh,
is going to come
okay.
later. Uh, the South, right, loves their slavery. They want slavery. They they see Lincoln get elected and they think, oh, this is trouble because he's going to get rid of
Right,
slavery,
right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So what did the South do? They didn't declare war. What did the South do we talked about last week?
Oh.
First 7 states in the South seceded, right? What does that mean?
Oh, succeeded. Mm,
The southern states seceded from the Union.
is is free?
They
No.
set they
Mhm.
not free the slaves free, but they
Right,
set
right.
themselves free. They tried to become a new country, which
Oh.
is really interesting, right? We talked about last week those southern states, first to 7 in the deep South. Actually, let's just look at a map. The yellow states, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, not all the yellow states, but the deepest South: Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. Not
Mhm.
these northern 4 yellows, but the deep South seceded. They said we're not part of the United States anymore, right?
Oh, separated.
Yeah,
Okay.
they separated, right? So they said we are
Mm-hmm.
separate, we are a new country, the
Mm-hmm.
United, or we are the Confederate States of America, the CSA. And of course, Lincoln said, new President Lincoln said, no, no way are you. I'm not going to let that happen.
Right.
So today, what we're going to talk about is how we're going to, normally we jump around a lot. but we're going to stay focused on the Civil War here for probably another 2 weeks, today
Okay.
and next week. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm not too concerned about generals and battles and this and that, but I do want to just see the big picture, the overall story of the Civil War. So first, we're going to talk about a couple of different things this week and next week, and whatever we don't finish this week, we'll get to next week. But first, I
Okay.
want to take like an overview. What do we all know about the Civil War? Then we'll zoom in a little bit more and get specific about some things. Okay.
Okay.
So generally speaking, we got the Civil War on the screen. I don't know where this isn't like a famous painting, but I found it somewhere, and I thought it was it's a good
Mhm.
exciting painting. These two
Right.
guys are fighting over the Confederate flag, right? This is the
Mhm.
red, white, and blue, the stars and stripes of the Union flag, the United States flag,
Mhm.
and the new country they said they were forming was the Confederacy, the Confederate States. So this is the Confederate flag.
Mm.
We call the American flag the stars and stripes. Back then, they called the Confederate flag the stars and bars. So I don't know what the story is behind this painting, but this is what it was like. I mean, the
Uh-huh.
weapons they had were rifles. Here's a
Mhm.
rifle on the right hand side with a
Right.
bayonet sticking out of it, right? So you're either
Mhm.
shooting somebody or stabbing somebody.
Mhm.
There's cannons. There was horses, right? This is the 1860s. There's no airplanes. They did have a
Right.
navy, okay,
Mhm.
but the American Navy and the Confederate Navy wasn't like these big battleships we see today. They were like sailing ships, right? And there was
Mhm.
only a couple of them. Like they didn't have 1,000 ships. They had like six. So by and large, the fighting of the Civil War was men holding rifles, shooting each other.
Mm.
Okay. So generally speaking, we've got the North and the South. The North, well, the South, let's talk about the South. The South is that new country. They said they are a new country.
Right.
So they call themselves the Confederacy. They
Mm.
seceded or broke away from the United States to become a new nation, the Confederate States of America. The
Mhm.
South relied heavily on African American slavery, right,
Mhm.
which had started a long time, 2 centuries earlier, when there were colonies, right before the United States starts. Even the early 1600s, the British colonies had slavery. Um, the North, the North is the United States, right? The country. But in the context of the Civil War, we call it the Union. So the Confederate soldiers and the Union soldiers. The
Mhm.
Union is the United States of America, right? It's the country that the South said they're breaking away from. It is our country. But we don't call it the Union today, but if in the Civil War we call it the Union. There was slavery in some northern states, but it wasn't as very important to them as
Mhm.
it was in the South. Most northern states did not have slavery. And so every teacher who ever talks about the Civil War talks about the advantages and the disadvantages of the North and the South. The North had almost all the advantages.
Mm.
The North had a larger population. All the biggest cities are in the North: New York, Boston,
Mhm.
those big cities. Okay, so big cities are going to have factories. Factories are going to have manufacturing. So if you need to supply an army with guns, ammunition, clothing, and food, you're going to need a lot of factories and a lot of people. And the North had those advantages.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, hey, Jenda, how are you? Thanks for
I'm
logging
doing
in.
fine. How about you? Sorry I'm
Good.
late.
No, it's okay. We're getting started. We're still focusing on the Civil War, as you can tell.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So the North had all the advantages. There was more railroad tracks, right, which is important when you're moving things and people around. Railroad tracks back then were kind of new and were important. And the big advantages the North had was it was already an existing nation, whereas the South was starting something new. right? So
Mhm.
very quickly they did create a government. They elected a president. They made a Congress, which was just like America's Congress. They wrote a constitution, which was very much like America's Constitution, only it said that slavery would forever be legal.
Mhm.
But they really just copied everything from the United States. But they're still starting from scratch, right? They're starting from the very beginning. So they're fighting a war. The South is fighting a war while trying to start a country, and that's that's going to be hard.
Mhm.
Um, they were an agricultural economy. Think all those slaves working on those plantations, picking cotton, picking indigo, picking rice. Okay, they're an agricultural economy. There's fewer factories, less manufacturing of goods and things, and they were just unorganized. The one thing that the South had was better military generals. Through the Civil War, it lasts 4 years. The North, the Union, went through 4 or 5 or 6 different top generals, like the man in charge of the whole military. They
Mhm.
went through a whole bunch. Some only lasted like a month because they just couldn't, the North couldn't get good leadership in charge of the military. The South had very experienced generals, um, well trained. What happens is there's people in the United States military, right? Then the South secedes. The South declares they're a new nation. Some people, some generals and officers in the United States military go with the South. So they leave the United States military to form the Confederate military, which is kind of interesting. So then you have these people fighting each other who maybe studied together at war college or served together in previous American wars side by side, and now they're fighting each other.
Mhm.
So the North and the South are the two sides in the Civil War. Um, here's the Confederacy. We have the yellow is all the states that break away or say they're breaking away to form the Confederacy. The blue and the green are the North. Now the are blue and the green are the North, are the Union states. The green, this map says, are border states, which are part of the Union. Border states, it says, are states that did have slavery, but did not secede from the Union. That's Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware. There was slavery in those states. They did not leave the North.
Mhm.
Okay, and that's going to become important in different times because Lincoln makes decisions to not threaten, to not anger the border states. He wants them to remain in the North. Even though they have slavery, slavery is bad, he wants them to not join the South. Okay, so that's when we talk about the North and the South, it really is the North and the South. All right. Some famous people of the Civil War. You probably recognize Abraham Lincoln. The top, these pictures go in order. Top picture is Abraham Lincoln. He was president, elected in 1860. He takes office in 1861. And like right then and there, the Civil War begins. Um, he is assassinated in office as president 4 years, basically at the almost a week before, I think a week before or a week after, right at almost the same time as the Civil War ends. So the
He
four
was
years of
killed on
Abraham
April.
Lincoln's,
He was
uh,
killed on April 14th of 1865, and I think you're right. I think it was the week after.
yeah, the week after. So basically the 4 years of uh, of Lincoln's presidency are the same 4 years of the Civil War, which is really interesting. The top Union general, especially at the end of the Civil War, most famous is Ulysses S. Grant, here with the cowboy hat. Um,
And
he
he was for the
was,
North, right?
what's that?
He was for the North.
Yeah, he's the Union,
Okay.
the Union general of the North.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, there was a couple, but he's like the most famous one, and he was general at the end of the war, so we remember
Okay.
him. He then went on later and became America's 18th president. So Lincoln was
Mm.
16, and then there was Johnson, who became president when Lincoln was assassinated, right? His vice president becomes president. Johnson really blew it. We've talked before about the Reconstruction period after the Civil War. Johnson was no good. Ulysses S. Grant comes in and, super popular, successful Union general, won the Civil War and becomes president, was very popular.
Did he do well in the North with voting? And I'm just curious, maybe you know the answer, and not do so well in the South when it came to voting? Like, I wonder what his
Yeah,
polls were, so to speak, because he was a general for the North.
let's look that up. Let's look that up. So that would have been the 1868 election.
Mhm.
And let's
Oh
see.
wow!
So I think red is Grant, right? Yeah, he actually won by a good
He
bit.
did well throughout the whole. Yeah,
Yeah, so there you go. Well, there's
it's
your answer.
interesting. Huh? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Um, so yeah, Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, and he's on the. Is he on the $50 bill? He's on some big dollar bill.
Yeah, $50.
Yeah.
50.
Okay, so then Jefferson Davis, who I've always thought he looks like Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
He was elected president of the Confederacy. So he is, if now it's up to you if you view, is the Confederacy a country or is it not a country?
It's
But,
weird.
like, do you say, okay, the South formed a new country, or do you say the South tried to form a new country? Abraham Lincoln, as president of the United States, never viewed the Confederacy as a legitimate, real country. He refused
Mhm.
to say that it was real.
Huh?
Um,
And though, but look at the outcome of that. That perception that he chose to carry,
mhm,
I perceive not to choose, that this has actually happened. They're still part of the United States of America hundreds of years later. So, in essence, looking at the past and the future today, the present,
mhm,
no, they didn't form a new country because a new country, if they wanted, they didn't build walls. I mean, there's a lot of things they could have done to secure their little country
mhm.
that they didn't do. So I would have to say no.
Yeah. So I mean, it was his call, and it's our decision how we look back at it as
Mm.
students of history. I tend to say, well, they did form a country. I mean, they weren't successful at it. They lost a war, but they chose a president. They had this
Huh.
Congress. I mean, they collected taxes. They made money. There's Confederate money out there.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah.
like
Yeah. If you
I
they
find
just
one,
tried.
want to.
Yeah.
I
So
just
that,
want to
yeah.
say that. I just want to say that. You want to know what dollar bill Ulysses Grant was? He was on. He was on the $50 bill.
Oh, the
He's on the
$50.
$50 bill.
Yeah. Yeah. So
so
yeah. Yeah.
no, you're
Grant was
right,
popular.
Matt, because they did. They had their own currency. But who did they pick as their president?
Well, this guy Jefferson Davis, he was.
Okay.
Um, they didn't just pick him out of the blue, right? He was an existing person. I think before the Civil War, I
Mm.
think he was like he's from Mississippi. I think he was a congressman in the United States Congress.
Mm.
I think. So he was an existing American
Okay.
Mississippian politician. Um, of course, Mississippi's in that deep South, and they seceded. So
Well,
he
they did a
was.
lot of work when you think about it. I mean, they rearranged a whole another side. I mean, that's
Oh
yeah. No,
yeah,
no,
yeah.
they most certainly did make another little country in a country. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mm.
mean, they weren't messing around. They were serious. They didn't say, well, they weren't threatening, we're
This
going to make a
was done.
country.
It was
They
doing
did it. Yeah, they
right.
did it. Okay, so Robert E. Lee, probably another name you know. He was the top Confederate general for the entire Civil War, a very good military general. Um,
My grandfather, his name was Otto Botto. Okay, I know it's
hmm,
a really crazy name.
Yeah.
But yes, it's true. Otto is a very odd name. He was the doctor for Robert E. Lee.
oh, really? Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Huh.
Great, great, great somebody. Yeah,
Yeah.
weird, right? Like every time I hear his name, I think of Ancestry.com.
Yeah, yeah, right. Robert E. Lee was Lincoln tried to get Robert E. Lee because he was a general in the United States Army. He tried to get him to not leave and join the Confederacy, and Lee, I think if I'm not mistaken, I could be mistaken, but I think I've read that Lee was personally against slavery,
He was.
but he was, I think, from Virginia, and so he felt it was his duty to go with Virginia and fight in the Confederacy. So Lee is an interesting, there tons, thousands of books have been written about him. Good general, very smart, very skilled. Um,
He was tough.
yeah, and fought a great war for 4 years. One of his, not the top general, but one of his slightly lower but still very high up generals was Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and he's the lowest picture here. So these are some of the names that are made famous by the Civil War. Okay, so famous people of the Civil War. Okay, battles. I'm not into battles. I'm sure you've heard of these. We as Pennsylvanians, I certainly do hope you know Gettysburg. Okay, it's a 4-year war, so a lot happens, right? Think of where you were 4 years ago. I mean, a lot happens. Gettysburg is basically at the halfway point in the Civil War. It's in the summer of 1863. And you can look at the dates here. There's the two armies are broken into pieces, right? There's lots of different moving pieces. And those pieces are moving around, chasing each other. This is all very slow motion, right? They're not driving on trucks, they're walking. If you need to fight a battle 200 miles away, you're walking there, right?
That sucks.
With wagons full of ammunition and wagons full of clothing and wagons full of food. Like, it was a slow war, right? Life, I mean, everything was slower back then.
Yeah.
That must have been nice.
What's that?
Must have been a little bit nice. Just the
Well,
way
yeah, but I mean, but like, would you want to take a walk of
Through a
200
war?
miles, at which point somebody's going to shoot at you like that?
Definitely not. I mean, we're
stressful.
gonna have to take like an 800-mile walk if we want to get around all the crap.
Right, right.
Where we're going.
So lots of different things. And there's strategy. There's the early parts. Really, a lot of historians divided into the first half before Gettysburg and the second half after Gettysburg. The first half is kind of jumping all over the first 2 years. Then they fight in Gettysburg, which is, as you see on this map, the northernmost battle on this map.
And that was in 1863.
July 1, 2, and 3 of 1863. And they call it the high water mark of the Confederacy because it is the most northern. It was really the one moment where it looked like the Confederacy was invading the North, which is worrisome.
Well, you can see that by these little orange stars as it's like going up.
Right.
You can see the Confederacy is kicking major butt coming up in here. And I can't tell what the red or the pink star means.
Well, the red is indecisive, so kind of a draw.
Oh, so they couldn't tell you who won that one?
Right, right.
Oh, so it was a tie. And that's funny. I'm sorry to laugh at that. It was a tie. I want to know who said it. And so then they come up to here. All right. That's interesting.
But then the Union, in the 3-day long, bloody, hard battle of Gettysburg, the Union wins, pushes back the Confederacy. The Confederacy comes back south, kind of retreats a little bit. And then it's especially the last year of the war, you have this purple line here. The North is kind of just beating up the South. The South is running out of people to fight, running out of men to send into the army. And so it's really just what you call a war of attrition, just waiting for the other army to just get worn out, right? It's 4 years. Everybody's worn out. Everybody's beaten up, but you just need to last longer than the other guy.
And some
So-
guys have ran away too. They like ran away from the war, and now they didn't want to fight no more.
Right. Yeah, people. I mean, from the
They're
very
hiding
beginning.
places because they don't want to be in trouble for
Yeah,
disappearing in the government war, but they don't want to fight anymore. They were really tired of it.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, totally. And we're gonna read once we get reading. This is good here, but they thought at the beginning they thought this was going to be a 1 month thing. They thought, especially people in the North, they said, "Oh, we're just going to beat up these Confederacy, the Confederate Army, scare them. They're no
Mhm.
match for us. This is going to be super quick." And then it
Turns out,
it became apparent that it was going to last a long time.
Mhm.
The final stages is Sherman's march to the sea. A Union general, I think William Tecumseh Sherman, General Sherman from the North, takes Chattanooga, takes Atlanta, Atlanta, Georgia, mostly burns Atlanta down,
Mhm.
and then just marches to the sea. And with a very large army, 100,000 men or so, marches, a couple hundred miles to Savannah, Georgia, and he leaves, and that's like several months. Okay. They're marching on foot, but as they go, they're like burning down towns, burning up
Mhm.
farms, killing livestock,
Yeah.
just wrecking like demoralizing, hurting the South as much as possible.
Hmm.
They get to Savannah, they burn down Savannah, Georgia. They go north through, they take Charleston. They go back up through North Carolina, South Carolina, or
Up
South
to
Carolina, then
Raleigh.
North Carolina,
Hmm.
and then I mean,
Mm.
really just do what you call total war,
Yeah.
which is, not just fighting the army, but just beating up, just hurting your enemy as much as possible.
Right, which meant civilian because
Hmm.
how
Yeah,
do we stop you from to keep advancing? Well, now we're going to take out people. It's more personal now, is what
right.
they.
Yeah,
That's rotten. That's not a fair fight.
I know. Well, I mean, it's the
I'm
same
just
kind of
saying.
thing.
I'm just saying. It's
Well,
just.
it's the same kind of thing happens because in World War
Mm,
II, we could not get the Japanese. We had defeated the Nazis, but we couldn't get the
mm,
Japanese to
Hmm.
surrender. So what did they do? They dropped two
they
atomic
get
bombs.
right.
They
Hmm.
did
But that's
something
not good.
totally immoral in order to end the war. So,
Isn't that
kind
why
of,
we now have like oh crap, why did my brain just go blank? Now we have rules of engagement, so to speak. Um
yeah. We
or
call them the Geneva Conventions. It's this
thank you.
agreement. Yeah. This
Right.
agreement that this is how you fight a war. You kill the other army, fine, but you don't kill civilians. You don't bomb,
Hmm.
non-military targets and stuff.
Right.
And, I don't know when that came about, but yeah, we have rules of war now. Now,
Hmm.
if you got to win, you got to win. If break your rules, whatever. But
Grandma
it,
and granddaddy was from Raleigh, and my granddaddy always used to talk about when he was younger was his granddaddy.
mm,
Like he remembers his granddaddy telling him stories of when he was a little boy about watching from his bedroom window
hmm,
troops come through in the middle of the night, and they didn't care. They would just make camp wherever.
right,
Hmm.
Found
right,
a place to make camp. That's where he said, and you look, his grandpappy told him that he would look out and all you would see is little fires, like hundreds of little fires, because that's where they were all, each man made little fires. And he
mm,
would tell stories at nighttime about what his granddaddy used to see when he was little. They left
yeah,
Raleigh and they
mm,
went north because there was less war. But
Hmm.
when it ended, they returned home.
right.
It was just too dangerous.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's people living across the South and the North. I mean,
Mhm.
most of the fighting of the Civil War is in the South, as you can see.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, there was I forget where the town was. There was a town somewhere that changed hands. Like there was a battle, and then the Union took control of the town, and then they fought back, and the South took control of the town. There was one of these towns
That's
somewhere that changed hands,
mm.
like you wake up one day and the
And you're
soldier
north.
outside is from the north and you trust him to take care of you. And then there's a battle and then the next day you trust the guy from the south to take care of you. So,
Mm.
you know,
That must have been
people,
confusing.
yeah, I mean, there's not just like there are battlefields, but a lot of the battlefields are like right next to a town or in a town, across a town. So no, it was a war being fought in and amongst people's lives, obviously. Um, okay, so here's a couple of paintings. This is some things of the Battle of Gettysburg. Okay, again, halfway through the war, kind of a moment where the North starts to have more success. The North wins the Battle of Gettysburg, um, and starts kind of getting on a hot streak, and then of course it took 2 more years to end the war. But I mean, this is just an illustration of the type of fighting. Like a lot of the old fashioned, right, Revolutionary War style fighting of form a line, everybody load your guns, ready, aim, fire. There's still that type of old fashioned fighting. Cannons, guns, charges, carrying your flag, right? We see in the picture here. You can find all kinds of battle maps, like this one on the right. The blue is the northern troops, the red is the attacking southern troops, and this is the map of Gettysburg, right? That the middle of the picture here is the middle of the map is atop of a hill. So the North was defending up on the top of a hill. The South was coming up the hill. Lots of long history there you can talk about. 3-day battle, lots of things happened. Another illustration there. And then on the bottom, I have this picture. There was this photographer named Matthew Brady. Photography was new at the time. And what photography there was, like, you couldn't take action pictures. It was the old type of, like, if you've ever seen a super old fashioned camera where they put like the blanket over them, right? Because it has to be dark. And then any movement at all is a blur, right? They weren't, it wasn't the advanced camera. So if you're going to take pictures of war, you're not taking a picture of a battle. The only thing that's still enough for you to take a picture of without being blurry is dead bodies. So Matthew Brady was a famous photographer back then. And so he took thousands of pictures of lots of different things. And you can, Google it, Matthew Brady, and you can see all his pictures, a lot of them from many different battles of just dead bodies on the field. And this is a picture of Gettysburg. But what that does, if you think back on history, what that does is, it's one thing to hear or read a newspaper story that, 10 boys from our town died in the Battle of Gettysburg, right? Or 10,000, I forget how many, I think it was like 25,000 or something. 25,000 men died in the Battle of Gettysburg. Well, okay, if I hear that, I know that's bad. That's very sad. But that's a lot different than seeing this photograph, right? Seeing the twisted bodies and the blood. Now they're black and white pictures, but so for the first time, people are seeing photographs of what happens at these battles, which is, people dying. So Civil War photography is important and really starts at this time. We're going to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. I guess we'll get to this next week. The other thing you've probably heard about the Gettysburg Address, right? Famous, not a very long speech. Only took Lincoln about 2 minutes to read it. It's not very long, but it's a famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. An address isn't like your mailing address. It's an address, like a speech that's given. It says speech made by Lincoln to dedicate a cemetery at Gettysburg Battlefield. 1863, in July, you have the Battle of Gettysburg, right? So many people from the North and South die at the Battle of Gettysburg in July. That November, they create a cemetery at the battlefield of Gettysburg. Lincoln goes and makes a speech at that dedication of that ceremony. That is the Gettysburg Address. It's very easy to read. Maybe I'll send a link to it later. Again, it took him 2 minutes to read it. It's not long, but it's a beautifully written address speech that basically says, these people died here. We're dedicating a cemetery here today. These men died. Let's continue to fight until the fight is over. Let's not let them have died in vain, is basically what he says. But it's Abraham Lincoln, beautiful, well-written speech. His speeches read very eloquently. The way he balances his thoughts and then comes back, there's almost like a rhyming of thoughts. It's really, the Gettysburg Address is interesting. Other things that happen, inventions during the Civil War, we have rifles. Up until then, they were fighting with muskets. Okay, same kind of thing, a long gun, right? You put it on your shoulder, but a musket just fires a ball, like you've probably seen, a little metal ball. A rifle fires a bullet. A bullet is different than a ball, right? You can probably picture a bullet, kind of flat and then cylindrical and then pointed.
Right.
And a rifle has a groove on the inside of the barrel so that bullet comes out spinning, whereas a musket just shoots a ball and it just kind of comes out. A rifle can shoot farther and can shoot much, much more accurately than a musket. So if in the Revolutionary War, 80 years before this, if you were standing, 100 feet away from somebody firing a gun at you, frankly, they were probably not going to hit you because a musket's not very accurate. In the Civil War, if you're standing 100 feet away from somebody with a rifle and they're pointing it at you, they're probably going to hit you. So the Civil War was much more deadly than any war previous.
Matt, you just cured the gun crisis of America.
Yeah.
We can all have a gun, but we have to have muskets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very few people would die if we all shot each other with muskets. So yeah, but that's a new thing. The rifles came out. Both sides have rifles. Rifles are different than muskets. That's a new thing. War photography we talked about. National paper money is a new thing on both sides, but the Confederates did print money. They had coins. I'm sure, I've never actually seen one, I don't think. But, they're out there. Collectors collect Confederate money. You had ironclad warships, which was not really submarines, but ships that were like coal powered, steam powered. They weren't sailing ships. And here's an old newspaper engraving. But they were basically like submarines. They looked like submarines. They just didn't go fully under the water. And it was a way you could attack, or really, they used them to ram sailing ships. But the ironclad warships was a new thing. And a unified nation. And that is a new thing. The United States, before the Civil War, maybe well before the Civil War, especially at the time of the Founding Fathers, the 1700s, every state kind of viewed themselves as very powerful, right? If you're from New York, if you're from Pennsylvania, if you're from Virginia, that's how you view yourself. I'm from Virginia. But now with the war, with the southern states seceding, the North has to come together. So, people from Massachusetts and people from New Hampshire can't view themselves as different anymore. They have to unite and fight together. So it, in a weird way, it sort of unites and brings together the whole country. So that was kind of a new thing. It ends 1865. We talked about Sherman's march to the sea. They just kind of beat up the South as much as possible. And it gets to a point, I don't know the exact details, but Grant and his army are literally chasing Lee and his army. And then they kind of get him cornered somewhere, like big armies, But it becomes apparent to Robert E. Lee, general from the South, that it's over. He's trapped. They're running out of supplies. They're running out of new people to put in the army in the South. He decides to surrender. So it happens at a town. It's not a courthouse. It's a town called Appomattox Courthouse. April 9th, 1865. I like this painting a lot. Lincoln especially decided to not punish the South. The soldiers for the South could keep, if they had a horse, they could keep their horse. If they had a gun, they could keep their gun.
Mhm.
But he said, go home, start your lives over, because Lincoln always had a plan, as he fought for 4 years, always
Mhm.
had a plan to, when this is over and the North wins, because he always viewed the North as going to win. When we win, and we got to get this South back as part of the country, right? How are you going to do that? You
Mhm.
can't have the South be angry. You can't have the South be beat up economically, because you've got to piece together this broken country. And so
Mhm.
Lincoln always had in the back of his mind, how are we going to bring this country back together?
Mm.
So they did not punish. I think even the Confederate generals were not punished. Now, Confederate generals could not, or anybody who was in the leadership of the Confederacy could not then, in the new brought together after the war country, the United States, if you were a Confederate senator or in the army, or uh, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, you could not serve in the United States government. And that
Mm.
makes sense, right? Because you were part of another, a part of a rebellious government. So yeah, we're not going to let you be a senator or run for president. But overall, the North was extremely forgiving of the South when they got that surrender. And then the next week, 5 days later, Lincoln goes to Ford's Theater, goes to see a play in
Mhm.
Washington, D.C., and is assassinated by John Wilkes Booth.
Right.
History would have played out very differently if Lincoln was able to remain in power and guide the nation into that time after the Civil War of forgiving the South, bringing the country back together.
Mm.
I don't know that it would have been perfect, because the South hated Abraham Lincoln, right?
Mhm.
Maybe it would have played out worse. Who knows? Because they would have hated the idea of Lincoln telling them what to do after the war, after they just lost and surrendered a war. Now we've got Abraham Lincoln telling us what to do. It would have been different, though. Um, Instead, when he's assassinated, his vice president becomes president, and Andrew Johnson was not ready for the job of
Mm.
bringing this broken country back together. Did a bad job. We've talked about Reconstruction before. There was a 12 years or so where um, it looked like things were going well. We've talked weeks ago about uh, all those African Americans, former slaves, even getting elected to Congress, getting elected to the Senate, which is wonderful. But then it kind of breaks apart. Racism comes back real strong, and plays out very differently. If Lincoln had not been assassinated, it would have been, I'd be interested to know what would have happened. And then this is this is a photograph of his um, funeral procession.
Mm.
Um, Millions of people got on the streets of Washington, D.C., and saw his body go by, in a
Mhm.
horse-drawn carriage. Um, it was then put on a train and weaved its way back even through Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and the train carrying Lincoln's body went back to Illinois, where he was from.
Mm.
And I believe that's where he was buried. So Lincoln's death, the whole country at the time when the war just ended 5 days earlier, um, just craziness, a crazy time, as we said before, just a crazy time to be alive. Okay, so I'm looking at another thing. So that's the Civil War. Okay, in a nutshell, actually, a 45-minute nutshell. Um, let's read. I was trying to put this back together here. I'm going to clean this up and send it out later. Um, Let's read real quick. We got 10 minutes. I think we can do it. Outbreak of the Civil War, Fort Sumter. Okay, so that's a big picture. We talked about the whole Civil War. Now, let's rewind, look at the beginning of the Civil War. Lincoln becomes president. Lincoln is elected in the winter, November of 1860. The South doesn't like that. They don't trust him. They don't like him. They think he's going to get rid of slavery, which they don't want. The South doesn't want. So let's pick up there. Because of Lincoln's election, this fire that was burning between the North and the South, right? We talked about the Missouri Compromise, 1820, Bleeding Kansas, 1850s. This tension explodes because of Lincoln's election. So let me jump in here. This is a map of Charleston Harbor, Charleston, South Carolina. We'll talk about that in a minute. Outbreak of the Civil War, Fort Sumter. Even as Lincoln took office in March 1861, Confederate forces threatened the federal held, right? The federal forces means the Union, means the United States military. Federal held forces, or federal held Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina. Okay, so Charleston, South Carolina. Let me find this United States map. Charleston, South Carolina, Fort Sumter right here. That's deep in the South, right? So South Carolina was the first state to secede, to declare that they were a new nation. America, the American army, still, Lincoln's army, still has a fort on an island, tiny little island in Charleston Harbor. What are you going to do with that Union fort deep in the South, right? So that's Lincoln's problem. It says, on April 12th, after Lincoln ordered a fleet to resupply Fort Sumter, there's Union soldiers there. I think there was like 68 Union soldiers there. Well, he's just going to take supplies to them. Lincoln orders a fleet to resupply Fort Sumter. Confederate artillery fired the first shots of the Civil War. Sumter's commander, Major Robert Anderson, surrendered after less than 2 days of bombardment, leaving the fort in the hands of Confederate forces under Pierre G.T. Beauregard. 4 more southern states, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee, joined the Confederacy after Fort Sumter. Border slave states like Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland did not secede, but there was much Confederate sympathy among their citizens. All right, let's go back to the map. So before the Civil War, before Fort Sumter, South Carolina is the first state to secede, and then the whole deep South goes with them, first 7 states. Then there's this conflict at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. It's a Union fort surrounded by the South. And so Lincoln says, hey, I'm just going to send, these men need food. We're going to send supplies. An unarmed, no guns, no troops, no ammunition, just sending them supplies. And the South says, no way, that's our fort now. And they start bombing Fort Sumter deep in the South. That starts conflict, right? Now guns are being shot, cannons are being shot. There is a war that's happening now. And so 4 more states, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, the upper South, also join the rest of the South. They say, hey, if Abraham Lincoln's going to fire, if there's going to be fighting, we're going with the South. Still, interestingly, those border states did not join the South, but these 4 upper South states did. So Fort Sumter, there's 7 states that secede before Fort Sumter, and 4 states that secede, that join those first 7 after Fort Sumter. It says, though on the surface the Civil War may have seemed a lopsided conflict, with the 23 states of the Union enjoying an enormous advantage in population, manufacturing, including arms production, and railroad construction, the Confederates had a strong military tradition, along with some of the best soldiers and commanders in the nation. So we talked about this. They also had a cause they believed in, preserving their long-held traditions and institutions, chief among these being slavery. Okay, a little bit of troops and battles and generals here. In the first Battle of Bull Run, that was one of the earliest Civil War battles. First Battle of Bull Run, known in the South as First Manassas. There was 2 battles in the same place. won a couple years later. On July 21st, 1861, 35,000 Confederate soldiers under the command of Thomas Jonathan, nicknamed Stonewall Jackson, forced a greater number of Union forces or Federals to retreat towards Washington, D.C., dashing any hopes of a quick Union victory and leading Lincoln to call for 500,000 more recruits. In fact, both sides' initial call for troops had to be widened after it became clear that the war would not be a limited or short conflict.
Mm.
So once they start fighting in Fort Sumter, Lincoln sends a message to all the states in the Union saying, we need troops. We're going to need an army. It's only going to be for 90 days, he said, 3 months. They thought this was really going to be quick. And then they start fighting these battles with tens of thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of people dying, and they realize this is not going to be quick. This is going to take a long time to beat the South. And of course, the South is trying to beat the North, and they thought, well, this is going to take a long time. Okay. Next week, we'll talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, which happens in, again, right, almost, 1863, halfway between the beginning and the end of the Civil War. We'll talk about Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. So, big picture, we talked about the big picture of the whole Civil War. Here's how it begins. The first battle is the Battle of Fort Sumter. Not much of a battle. The Union did not really even fight back very much, but the South takes that Union fort in the middle of Charleston Harbor. So, any questions? I know we talked about a lot. Any questions?
No, not for me.
Mm-mm. It's
How
good.
about,
No, the way you explain it, it was good.
good.
Mhm.
Is there any vocab words that we're gonna have to know, like for the GED test?
Well, there's not really. I do try when I do this kind of thing. I try to pull out what we call academic vocabulary. I mean, there's no like vocabulary where you have like to find definitions of specific words, but just for reading skills and social studies and science skills, there are good, again, what we call academic vocabulary words, just bigger words that are, maybe not super specific. Just good words to know, smart words everybody should know. Generally, I try to go through these readings and highlight them. Like maybe I would highlight the word bombardment or,
Mm.
words a lot of people know. You probably have heard it before, but maybe it's just good to talk about. I don't think I've highlighted this. I actually whipped this up this week pretty quickly. Maybe I'll go through this and see if there's any good kind of upper level academic vocabulary words. That's a good question. But to answer your question, not specifically. It's really just general knowledge. And so what today we're focusing on the Civil War. Yes, that's very specific. But week to week, I think everybody would agree, we try to do like pretty broad stuff. We spent a few weeks talking about the Cold War, right?
Mhm.
We're zooming in on people here and the Battle of Fort Sumter. But what I'm trying to do there is give you a little bit of knowledge that if on the GED test, if you read something specific about the Civil War, maybe a letter from a soldier about the Battle of Gettysburg, or a slave diary, from a particular time period, I want you to have broad knowledge that you can then drop that specific thing into and say, oh, well, I don't know exactly who this slave is, but here's what I know about the South. You know what I'm saying? So today we're getting kind of specific. This week, next week we'll talk about the Emancipation Proclamation. But broadly speaking, week to week, and if you go back and watch some of the recordings from the past, we bounce around, and I just want you to have a broad understanding of American history. And so That's what the GED test requires. There's not specific people you need to know. There's not specific dates, battles, wars. You just should be kind of generally aware of the bigger trends in American history.
Okay.
I'll go through this. I'll clean this up a little bit because again, I whipped it together pretty quickly this week. I'll go through. We'll finish this reading. We'll do this next week. But I'll go through. Maybe I'll highlight good academic vocabulary words. I'll send this out. I'll work on it this afternoon. I'll send it out this afternoon. You can read over what we've read over. You can see what we already did. You can read ahead if you'd like. But we will next week. We will do the rest of this reading and discuss the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War in general. Okay. Any other questions? Now, some of this, I know for some of you, this is brand new information. So anything confusing that I didn't explain well?
No, you did good job.
Okay. Well, if you think of anything, again, I recommend you look over what we looked at. If you want to read ahead, that's cool. That's great. It would help you, help you understand it next week. If you come across anything, you have a question, send me an email back. Just reply to my email and let me know. I'll send this out this afternoon. I'll clean it up a little and send it out and we'll go. So enjoy the weather. Last week, remember what we did last week? It was snowing at my house.
Yes.
Oh
Now
no.
now it's like 80 degrees yesterday.
It's
So
beautiful.
yeah, get out.
That's what happens. Sometimes it
Yeah.
snows and then sometimes it get cold and then most of the time it gets warmer.
Yeah, that's spring for you.
You
So
all
enjoy
have a great week.
enjoy some weather, everybody.
Yes,
Bye, guys.
absolutely. You too.
All right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, have a good afternoon. Thanks for logging in.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.